Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, following the 3 H's of the channel and all that great stuff. And in this video, it's about to get weird and bizarre. So, if that sounds like your cup of tea, definitely pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. I saw, for what lack of a better term may be, some sort of unknown hominid, or a vampire, or what, I don't know. Something was out in the woods once. I was hunting in an old-growth forest, so it's basically a tangled nightmare. I had found a dead deer the day before that had, weirdly, some joints and its legs smashed, so I assumed that there was a predator, some kind of bigger animal like a mountain lion or something, maybe a bear nearby. It was the evening. It wasn't dark yet, but it was going to be in about an hour or an hour and a half. There's this particularly nasty patch of blackberry bushes that have entangled with other vegetation and have even encircled and enveloped some of the lower areas of trees that I have to get through. I say, screw it, and I decide to go around the whole area because it's almost unnavigable. I noticed that the woods are really quiet after I'm going through this spot. Not like the absence of any noise. The bugs are still being bugs, and there are some birds, but it's quieter here, almost like it's muffled. I'm going between some really old, tall trees, not redwoods, but I'm pretty sure they came close. I start getting this staticky feeling. The chills run up and down my spine. The prickling starts all over my body, and then I get that something is staring at you, watching you feeling. I start to look around. Out of the upper right corner of my eye, I see eye shine. I look up in its direction. The thing looks mostly like a human woman, except with odd, elongated proportions. Clearly something different with the skeleton stuff. She's completely naked, slightly dusty and dirty from bark dirt, and she's enormous. She's over 7 feet tall. She's making this bizarre humming noise. I can't think of an analogy for it. And then opens her mouth. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like she does the grimace emoji that you can find on your phone, and her teeth are icy white. I literally leap backwards and take off running. My head is empty of all thoughts, just fear. She doesn't follow, and I never see her again. The best example of what I have seen is this picture that I made. I wish there was a better conclusion or whatnot, but it is what it is. One feature that stuck out and is still in my mind was that she was almost entirely flat-chested. It took years for me to figure out why, but apparently humans are the only hominid species where females have large breasts instead of minor bumps, basically. The whole thing is just bizarre. I've told this before, but it's still probably the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. So I bought a piece of rural property a long while ago. On the weekends, I would go out and stay there to clean up the place because it was really overgrown at that point. After shortly being there, I notice some weirdness starting to happen. My stuff is getting moved around. Little things are missing. It's not trespassers. The soil is a powdery, volcanic type that holds on to footprints for well over a week if it doesn't rain. Initially, I just believe it's me being forgetful, being tired because of all the work I've had to do. So I continue on believing this, maybe for my own sanity, I don't know. So I cut a fire line, I remove dead branches, and I build this or that, whatever needs to be done. But as I'm doing this, the weirdness only increases. I come back some weekend to find that the lawn chairs that I had on the roof of my cabin were flipped upside down and folded up. And for me, this is really weird, almost the last straw. There's no footprints, but my old ones from the previous weekend that I was there. I'm struggling to rationalize it. I decide that I should just try to forget it. The next weekend, though, I bring my dad with me. He's going to help me cut a bunch of brush around the cabin for fire prevention. We cut and wood chip for hours. We cleared a ton of brush. By the end of the day, we start barbecuing. Dad says he's headed up the hill to the outhouse. He'll be back in a few minutes. A few minutes later, my phone rings. It's my dad. What the hell? Is he out of toilet paper or something? I pick up and say hello. There's nothing. I say, hello? But a little bit louder. I hear myself through the phone. I think, what the hell? I go into the cabin and I see my dad's phone charging on the solar battery. There's an active call with me up on the screen. I end the call and I think this has to be a spoofed call. Something. I don't know. I can't explain it. But then why did it actually go through his phone when I picked it up? My dad comes back. I tell him what happened. He looks a little freaked out. He says that he locked his phone after putting it on the charger. We eat steaks and drink some beer, trying to calm down a bit. The mood swings a little weird though that night. We drink until dark, and despite the alcohol in my blood, I still can't let go of the feeling that something's wrong. I excuse myself to the outhouse for a minute. I walk up the little hill, and I walk over to an old stump. I unwrap a Twinkie that I brought with me, and I set it on the stump. Then I crack a beer and place it next to it. I say out loud into the darkness, "This is for you. Sorry for cutting down so much brush." I felt a little silly. I don't do stuff like this. I never have. But it felt like the right thing to do. I didn't know what else to do. I walked down the hill and I continued drinking with my dad. Eventually, we go to bed. The weirdness basically stops on subsequent visits, and it no longer feels hostile, for the lack of a better word, and that's how I formed an agreement with whatever lives on my land. A spirit, a fae, I'm not sure. I give them stuff on the stump once a month, and just kind of talk to them, or talk to the land when I'm there. They still occasionally do the pesky moving around of stuff, but it feels like it's all in good fun now, and not meant to scare me. Also, my dad was so freaked out that he didn't even want to stay to make breakfast. He just packed his stuff and wanted to go. This last month, I gave them bread, honey, a candy, and a beer that I like. This was sent in by somebody from Fullerton, California, USA. So, I hope I can do your story justice. Hello. I greatly enjoy your channel, so I thought that I might share a second-hand account told to me years ago. If people seemed interested, I have a couple more to share as well. Although this one is probably the strangest, and it's not a cryptid story though, but hopefully listeners will still enjoy it. This story was told to me back in 2009 when I was working as a therapist. I will not share a lot of details about my former client to protect his anonymity, even though he has since passed away. And yes, therapists still try to protect their clients' information, even after death. So my client was a police detective working for a neighboring county, and he had scheduled with me as he had become distraught over recently being diagnosed with a terminal disease. During one of our sessions, we began speaking about the possibility of an afterlife. My client stated vehemently that he was an atheist, sharing that this was especially true regarding his line of work and what he'd seen people were capable of. But then he became quiet and thoughtful for a moment. He then stated, "Well, but I can't say this physical realm is all there is, considering all the crap that happened to me when I was a kid." He began to share with me a very creepy and fantastic story, and it definitely falls within the realm of the paranormal. As he told it, this occurred in the early 1970s when he was 14 years old. He was living in the Midwestern USA with his family, consisting of his mother, father, older brother, and until recently, his paternal grandmother. Grandma, who he was very close to, had come to live with the family a few months before when she had been diagnosed with cancer. He loved spending time with her and listening to stories of her childhood, and was grief-stricken when she finally passed away. My client said that things began to get weird when, after a period of time, he began to catch glimpses of Grandma from time to time, just the back of her going through a door, or the familiar sound of her slippers passing by his room as he was falling asleep. At first he thought that he might be going crazy, and then he rationalized that maybe he was just imagining her because he was still so sad. But little by little, the other members of the family began sharing their experiences, seeing or hearing her. This actually became somewhat alarming when neighbors began sharing that they had been seeing somebody walking around their home through the windows when the family was out. One time, they had gone on a short vacation. My client said they came home to find the police in their driveway after the next-door neighbor had alerted them after viewing a supposed intruder in their home. However, no one was ever found inside. Eventually, the story turned darker. One night, after an explosive argument with his wife, my client's father wound up spending the night on the couch. During the middle of the night, the whole family woke up to the dad literally screaming, and everyone came running out to find out what was going on. They found him sitting on the couch, crying and wringing his hands. His father did not want to share with his kids what had happened, but after lots of coaxing, his mother shared with my client's older brother, and my client eventually got his brother to spill the beans. Apparently, Dad had woken up to find his deceased mother, my client's grandmother, standing at the end of the couch, fully nude, with hands on her hips, laughing maniacally. Dad would not discuss this night, but soon the whole family experienced a night of terror. At this time, it was winter, and they would all commonly gather with the family's big collie dog in the living room, watching television with a big roaring fire in the fireplace, as the rest of the house was just too cold to hang out in for any extended periods. On this night, my client noticed his dog kept raising his head and looking down the dark hallway that led to the bedrooms. The dog would watch for a while, prick his ears up, and then lay back down on his paws. Eventually, he looked up and began whining. Then, all hell broke loose. My client says his family was surprised to hear the sound of something heavy running down the dark hall into the living room. The family stared as the dog let out a roar and ran forward, seemingly to bite into something that they couldn't see. My client said that he clearly remembers seeing something lift his dog off the ground, at times as the two struggled, while growls from whatever it was echoed through the room. He said his father jumped up and wrapped his arms around the dog and yanked him back onto the couch. Then they heard the heavy footsteps retreat back down the hallway, but this dog proceeded to squirm out of his dad's arms and give chase. After a moment, my client, his older brother, and his dad crept down the hall, turning lights on as they went. He stated that the hallway was L-shaped, and at the end of the first arm ended in his brother's room. The family could hear growling and struggling from his brother's room, but for some strange reason, the light from the hall did not seem to penetrate into the room. My client says that it appeared as if a curtain of inky blackness was covering the open doorway. Not sure what to do, the scenario was decided for them when the dog came flying out of the dark doorway and crashed into the opposite wall. The dog yelped and proceeded to run to the living room, followed immediately by the other family members. My client said that his dad had the whole family immediately put their coats on. Grabbing the dog, they headed off to a motel. The next day, my client's mother went off to her church to get some help, as she was the only churchgoer in the family. When she returned, she told the family that her minister had told her that he knew of some people that had experience dealing with such things, but it would be a few days before they'd be able to arrive. They stayed at the motel for a couple more days, but due to the financial situation, they eventually had to go home. My client said that the family basically camped out in the living room over the next few nights, waiting for help to arrive. Him and his brother sleeping in sleeping bags in front of the fireplace. Their dog had refused to go back inside the house, so they had to make a bed for him in the garage. He reported that this waiting period was excruciating, and that he definitely was not going to share the worst of it. He added that his mother collected china dolls and had a whole mess of them on the mantelpiece. Him and his brother would lie awake in their sleeping bags for most of these nights, listening to the dolls whispering and giggling to each other above their heads. When their saviors arrived, it turned out to be a husband and wife. Now at this point in the telling, I actually had to interrupt my client, and yes, you guessed it, showing up on their doorstep was Ed and Lorraine Warren. He acted surprised when I said something along the lines of, "The famous demonologist team actually came to your rescue?" He said he remembered their names, but didn't know anything else about them. He always stayed away from that stuff, he said, just like they told us to. I asked him if his family's story was published in any of their books, and he said that he had no idea. Keep in mind that this was a few years before any of the Conjuring movies came out. Continuing, he said that the Warrens had instructed the family to leave for the day and return that evening, which they did. My client says that the couple told them that things should be quiet now, but they were to always surround themselves with light and happiness, to never use Ouija boards, or to try experimenting with seances. He had no idea what they did while the family was gone, and reported that nothing paranormal ever happened in their house again. Now, being interested in the paranormal, I was itching like mad to ask my client a lot of questions, especially as to why he thought this all started up in the first place, but the tract would be entirely self-serving and had nothing to do with the topic of exploring an afterlife, which is where the conversation started. Trying to be a good little therapist, I resisted. I do believe my client's story for a few reasons. He had no prior knowledge of my interest in the paranormal. He was a police officer and had no reason to make this up. Plus, he stated that he had never told anyone this story, and why in the world would you be spending a lot of money to tell an almost perfect stranger a ghost story? I will close with, my client told me that he always strived to make everywhere he lived since moving away from his childhood home full of light and love, as instructed by Lorraine Warren. He mentioned, however, that on the only trip he had ever made to visit his brother in an adjoining state, his brother had not seemed to succeed in this practice, as my client had to stay in a nearby hotel. He said his house has shadows where there shouldn't be any. So thank you to the person from Fullerton, California. I hope I could do your story justice. This was sent in to me by Anonymous, so I hope I can do your story justice. Hey there, I've been a listener for a while now. Thanks for all the great stories. I wanted to send in my story below. I have had paranormal experiences my whole life, and I think that they all started from this when I was a kid. When I was almost 3 years old, my family moved from Michigan to Kentucky because my dad purchased a convenience store in Lexington. Some people might think this is BS because I would have been too young to remember, but oddly enough, I remember a lot of things from my childhood. Even at that time, I was about to turn 3. When we got to Kentucky, we moved into a townhouse outside of Lexington. It was a 2-bedroom townhouse with my older brother and myself sharing a room with 2 twin-size beds. After living there for a short period of time, my brother and I had went to bed one night, and I recall vividly that I was not able to fall asleep. We had a window-mounted air conditioning unit in our room, so it just kind of kicked as I was looking at it. Both of our beds were against the wall on each side of the room, and our feet were pointed toward the side of the room that had the door for entry and a closet. As I was hearing the AC unit kick on, I looked a bit to the left, and there was at least an 8-foot-tall, dark shadow man wearing a top hat, standing in front of the closet door. It looked like he was wearing a long black cloak. He had a completely black face with no features and a black top hat. He stood there for a couple of seconds, and I remember feeling totally frozen in fear. And then all of a sudden, he was sitting on the side of my small twin-sized bed, staring down at me with his featureless face. As I laid there completely frozen, he did not make a move, just sat there, staring at me. I don't know how, but at some point I must have fell asleep, because when I woke up, he was gone. The next night, when we went to bed, I had kind of forgotten about it, and was too young to really rationalize what I had saw. I didn't mention anything to my parents either. As I laid there, trying to fall asleep, suddenly, he was there again, standing in front of the closet, and then suddenly, on the side of my bed, staring down at me. Again, I was frozen in fear, but I didn't get the feeling that this thing wanted to harm me. This pattern continued, night after night, until it got to the point where I was no longer afraid of this thing. It would sit on my bed and stare at me. I would stare back. I can recall no longer being fearful, and even somewhat relaxed, as I had gotten used to him coming. Shortly before I turned 5, my parents decided to move back to Michigan. The neighborhood my dad's store was in had gotten really bad, and my dad didn't feel safe any longer running the store, so we sold it. When we left back to Michigan, I no longer saw the figure, and never really told anyone about it.
Moving forward a few years to the time I was around 9, we had moved into a new house. I was playing hide and seek with my brother and cousin, and I hid in my parents' closet. As I was sitting down at the bottom of the closet, a completely black hand, which appeared to be wearing a glove, reached down from in between the clothes that were hanging and just waved high, wiggling its fingers. I was immediately just fascinated and had the overwhelming feeling that this hand belonged to the entity and he was just checking in on me. After that, I never saw him again. Fast forward about 25 years, and I suddenly started thinking about these incidents, and I just decided to look online to see if anybody else experienced anything similar. My jaw almost hit the floor when I saw the Hat Man, as they call him, is a commonly seen shadow figure that is reported all around the world. I had no idea and just thought it was a unique experience, but I was blown back to see all the content. Some say that what happened is just sleep paralysis, but why would people all see the same thing? To this day, I have no doubts that what I saw is 100% real. So thank you to Anonymous for sending that in.
So, what'd you think of those? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. In the description as well is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. There's also super thanks here on YouTube. And somebody mentioned members, but I haven't sorted that out yet. I don't know a whole lot about it. But just watching the video, liking, subscribing, commenting is really great too. It really helps the channel. So I hope you enjoyed pulling up a stump. I hope you enjoyed the video. And I'll see you in the next one. Make sure to stay happy, healthy, and hydrated. And also, since it's coming up on Halloween, remember to stay safe. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.